Good afternoon. It's quite a beautiful day today, and sometimes I think I would have just liked to go out of the city and spend some time, maybe do some swimming. But there's some things that are more urgent, it seems. That's why we're here, and I appreciate that you could have been somewhere else doing many other things, but you chose to be here. So thank you for that. And I would also like to seize this chance to thank all the artists and the many curators and other activists, all the poets, all the musicians, all the people that are here this weekend to make this possible. Without them, the world will be much poorer. So thank you very much. I am actually here to introduce Simone INOU and Daniel Romuald Bitouh. By way of introduction, I wanted to pick up on something in this brilliant piece by Basil Abbas and Rohan Aburameh. And it was a short, I'll call it a poem. And it says, once we said we're in search of a new language. Now we hold on to any form of language we can find to hold these broken parts together. And I think it's extremely beautiful because I also think this is what Simone and Daniel are doing. Holding on to any language they can find. And they're doing that beautifully so. And I have disagreed for many years with the fact that you cannot use the master's tool to dismantle the master's house. I think you really need to use the master's tool to dismantle the master's house. You obviously have to create new tools for yourself, but if those are the tools that are already at your disposal, you should use them. And Simone and Daniel have been doing so as social scientists, as cultural scientists, as journalists for a very long time now, for over 2 decades, being based in Vienna and doing that work from there. And I see them in a long line of thinkers, I would call them intellectual activists. And there is, you can go back onto, say, the 18th century with somebody like Anton Wilhelm Amo, based in this territory, this German-speaking territory, acting as a scholar. And, you can choose to say, no, he was just a philosopher, But I think there are many indices in his work that actually showed that he was very much into thinking about how he got to this space and his being in that space at a particular time. There were not many people that wrote about the rights of the black people in 1729 as a thesis, for that matter. Besides that, I could skip also 100 years and more. And in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a journal founded in Hamburg called Elolombe ya Cameroon. A group of Cameroonian activists, intellectuals in Germany that wanted to write about their being in this space, the colonial history, actually the colonial present, because they were in that, and publishing bilingually in Douala and in German. And that is quite something. We tend to forget these things. And Simone and Daniel, as I said, have been doing this work for many years. And this has culminated in a project that they call Project 3Rs. And it's very interesting because while we're in Berlin and in other places thinking about restitution as rehabilitation, restitution as whatever, these guys were in Vienna thinking about the same thing. You know, restitution, rehabilitation, reconciliation. So you can say it is something that touches the nerve of time. You can say it's some kind of a noosphere, so we're all thinking about the same thing. But it's not something of the present. It's something that they've been thinking about for several years. And so we really had to invite them to come here today and talk to us about these 3 Rs and how, what it means to do that work from Vienna, where until today you still have the crown, the hat of Moctezuma is still there. How does one think about these things from that space? Daniel Romuald Bitouh is a cultural scientist. He's an author, and he graduated. He has a PhD from the University of Vienna and from Yaoundé in Cameroon. He studied German and African literatures in Yaoundé and in Vienna. He became a German teacher, lecturer for African literatures in the University of Vienna. I think he will talk about his research in a bit. And Simone INOU is a sociologist, studied in Douala, and studied journalism in Vienna. And coordinator of various projects, including Wiener Zeitung, Die Presse, and several other things that he is also going to talk about. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome them today to Savvy Contemporary. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay,
function. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, dear Bonaventure Dikun, dear Savvy team, it's a great honor for AFRIEUROTEXT to be here, to be invited here, and to be part of the program, the Savvy program. To talk or to present our restitution project, baptized 3R project: restitution, rehabilitation, reconciliation. So the 3R project is carried out in cooperation with Fresh Black Austrian Lifestyle. So let me tell something about AFRIEUROTEXT, just short. So AFRIEUROTEXT is in Vienna, a cultural association, a library, and also a bookstore. So an Africa-centered bookstore. So what we are doing is, let's say, a differentiated educational participation through different projects and event format. So if somebody wants to know more about AFRIEUROTEXT, just want to go to Google and just type AFRIEUROTEXT. And Simon is going to tell something about Fresh.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, thank you so much. Thank you, the audience. Thank you, Bonaventure. Thank you all of you present here today and this afternoon. I will also thank our ancestors, because without our ancestors, there would have never been possible for us all to be here today. And I would like you to have 1 minute of silence in order to respect their memories and to respect ourselves, because it is important for us not to forget them. Thank you. Thank you so much. The Republic of Austria is a small country in the Alps. I think it's almost 1/10 of the German, geographical size. There are almost 9 million inhabitants in Austria, and Austria is well known for Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. When we speak about culture and music, Austria is also well known about Adolf Hitler, because Adolf Hitler was born in Austria. Austria is also well known because of Angelo Soliman. Angelo Soliman was a friend of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was from Nigeria, and the first African challenging the intellectual Viennese in the 18th century. And there have been many articles, many exhibitions about this person, this personality, and he came to Austria or to Europe as an enslaved person. But he thought he was speaking more than 7 languages, European languages, but he fought to rehabilitate his dignity in Austria. And in this way, we are, as Africans, working in Austria the last 20 years on the topic of dignity, on the topic of rehabilitation, on the topic of restitution, saying to ourselves, even if Austria has no colonies, they were accomplices of many European countries which had colonies in Africa, Latin America, or Asia. I am a journalist and the editor of Fresh Magazine. And Fresh Magazine is the first German-speaking youth magazine, because we have decided not only to focus on the topic of Africa, but to focus on the topic of youth. And the youth is the future. And we cannot accept our youth to grow up in Europe. We cannot accept our youth to grow up in this society with their experiences and excluding others. Black, like white youths, they need to grow up in an environment where they are able to live together. And this is the challenges we in Vienna, AFRIEUROTEXT, and Fresh Magazine are working on the topic of restitution. We have many projects, but the most challenging issue is how to take back what Austria with other European countries have brought to Europe without the permission of the one who possesses those things. And I think we are here today together because this topic is mostly important to all of us. And only if we hold our hands, we will reach our goal. And not only African will reach this goal together, or not only Asian, or not only Latin Americans, but only the way that we can come together and fight the so-called oppressive system that is currently trying to divert us from our own goals. I think you can continue, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. So the discourse on restitution didn't start with President Emmanuel Macron appearing in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, and publishing the will of the French government to give back African cultural artifacts kept in French museum. So the 3R project, the 3R are here a compilation of aspects of the past, present, and future of our world. The history of violence, oppression, economic exploitation, racial segregation, etc. So the African continent and Africans were and are still the terrain par excellence where subjects and objects had made and are making the experience of trauma, the trauma of colonial exploitation and exclusion, and the scars and aftermath of those traumatic experiences are still alive in our present and are even threatening to still be haunting the future of people of African descent, locally and globally. So cultural artifacts from African countries kept in European museum institutions are a dimension of the cultural ADN of African society. So their captivity in European museums and their absence in African countries, as well as the various claims of getting them back to Africa, have put the debate on restitution in the center of actual political, cultural, and societal awareness. Some major events like the murder of George Floyd, a black American citizen, by the police brutality on the street of Minneapolis in the USA last year has fueled the rage of not only black people but also of non-black people all over the world. Claim for justice as the basis of every effective reconciliation, restitution and rehabilitation are also the prerequisites for that justice and reconciliation at the global scale, and especially as far as people of African descent are concerned. So this project that is creating a triple impact through the trilogy of restitution, rehabilitation, and reconciliation in the Austrian cultural and political context, seek to raise the awareness of the Austrian civil society, political establishment, and of the classical Austrian institutions producing discourses on or about Africa, on the necessity of a governmentality turn as far as the restitution issue, the rehabilitation of the African subject, justice and reconciliation, both locally and globally. So, Simon is going to show or to present what we are doing, what we have done till now, and then we will get into conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. We have started the event because it was important to invite the politicians, to invite the 5 most important Austrian museums to discuss the topic of restitution. The 4th of March was not was a date that was not really that was how can I say it? We wanted to organize it on the 4th of March because this year they were celebrating 100 years of one of the biggest Austrian researcher anthropologists who collected many human remains of African people and brought it to the University of Vienna, where they continue to study the silly ethnology about African people. And it was important for us not only to make it on this day, but to challenge the idea of scientist Mr. Bitouh, who brought human remains from Namibia, from South Africa, to the Faculty of Anthropology at the University of Vienna in order to let the white Austrian world to study Africans. And we invited all those, as you see, the Welt Museum, where you can find one of the greatest collection of the Benin bronze, and they came and told us they will send it back to Nigeria. At the same time, they are waiting for legal frames. And the question is now, who is going to set up those legal frames? The Naturhistorisches Museum, the Museum of Histoire Naturelle, Natural History, they refused to come. And I know why, because they have also human remains in their museum. And they were not able to tell us. I know that there is a human remain of a Cameroonian. They were not able to tell us more about it, but we are continuing on this path because I think we should put them under pressure, and they should tell us exactly what they wanted to do or they want to do, but we know exactly what we want to do. One of the most important person in this discussion in Austria is liberal deputy, Mrs. Brandstätter Enrique, who has made a parliamentary inquiry 2 years ago concerning this debate, and this is the person who is currently challenging the Austrian state in Austria to bring back all the African objects to African countries. And as I said before, we as African, we cannot, as alone people, we cannot challenge the system. And we need, in German, the beautiful word is Verbündete. Yeah? We need people with whom we can work together, because this is the only way. to solve major problems in our own society. Daniel, can you speak more, or do you have any question for us, perhaps? Yeah. We have also, when we were organizing it, Daniel was in Cameroon, and have contacted Professor Kouman Doumbé and Dr. Christian Nanatuisse, and those are also some Cameroonians working on the field of restitution. And I think one of the most challenging issue here is also to challenge the main idea that we read everywhere in newspapers or in other medias, that we do not have any structure to welcome African artifacts. We do not have the possibilities. And I think perhaps this question is wrong. We need another way of questioning ourselves. And even this art, this artifact, we as Africans, we didn't do it for museum. I think this is the first thing we should have into consideration. And when discussing about this topic here in Europe, we should not only focusing on the materiality of the artifacts, because we see it in a museum, we see it in some institutions. We forget that behind the object, we have sciences. Behind the objects, we have 1,000 years of cultures. Behind the objects, we have many people coming together, sitting, discussing about topics, discussing about how to build their own world. Behind the object, there is a kind of self-esteem. And how can we grow up today? How can we respect each other today if we do not even have self-esteem? That's the very challenging question. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the insight on what it takes for action to be made. Today, the focus is the legacy, the legislature, the possibilities to do what we know what is needed, as you mentioned. I would like to quote from one researcher who in 1994 actually said what you just mentioned, the need for these remains, as in these so-called natural museums, to go back to the ones who created them, the ones whose creators are still with them, the ancestors, so the manifolded memories, as in that word museum, which is related to the muses, the arts, the science. And the researcher's name is Ekpo Eyo. He was a Nigerian researcher and lived from 1931 to 2011 and was very important for archaeological research in Nigeria. I just want to point out also that at ENTSCHÄDIGUng we do long-term research, and for us references are very important because, as you know, if we don't point out what we know, it will always be contested, and we need to also preserve it. And so we have that ENTSCHÄDIGUng doc just in the back, where you can also find documents that state what you say, also that restitution didn't start with Macron. And so in 1994, Ekpo Eyo mentioned in a text titled Conventional Museums and the Quest for Relevance in Africa. Although the Western world knows what a museum is, in many parts of Africa, its purpose is an open question. To many Africans, it is an alien institution introduced by colonialists. Their intentions were good. They wished to study and exhibit local works of art and artifacts and preserve them from deterioration and depredation by local and foreign traders. Yet, collecting important art objects and artifacts, some of which were still part of active rituals, and locking them up in a building rather resembling a prison, was to many Africans and foreigners alike inimical in principle. Nor did many Africans show much interest in the displays within the glass cases unless such exhibits pertained to their own particular ethnic heritage. The museums were therefore seen as white elephants stuffed by eccentric colonialists, assisted by Africans glad of a job, and visited mainly by foreigners. If we trace the origin and development of the museum in Europe, we may discover why these African museums, as modeled on European institutions, failed to make an impact on the lives of Africans or to meet the needs of the communities they were meant to serve. However, we shall also see how in time certain projects have transformed them into cultural and social centers of great vitality. So this is a reference that our colleague Sagal Farah, who is taking care of the memory, the SABIDOC, was recommending, because in this text we have kind of a history of a museum, what it meant. He points out that in the 3rd century before the Christian era, there has been the big museums in the so-called ancient Nubian time, with the Museum of Alexandria, but also with so much of a scientific evidences as also on the pyramids and on the sarcophagi. He mentioned also that these were sources of knowledge for the philosophers who then went there for studies before the Greeks invaded these areas. So we have Archimedes, we have Pythagoras and further ones, where you actually also know that the Greeks referred to the ancient Africans as the teachers of philosophy. He also talks about the fact that a certain German brought in that idea to have the museums in Nigeria, but the museums were actually not accessible to the community. So in their own country, we have prisons. So with that alliance that you build in Austria, as you mentioned, also the reference of Austria is kind of hostile still. It has also hostile history. What do you see as perspectives on the legal aspect? What does it need for that frame to be built, that legal frame? Is it the African Union? Is it the community in Austria? Is it are the head of states from European countries or big organizations? What could you find in these conversations panels that you did?
Okay, thank you very much for these, let's say, remarks on museum, their function today. So I'm going to, let's say, concentrate my contribution, let's say, focusing on Austria, on Vienna. So the critical debate about the way Austrian museums, institutions are functioning, let's say, has not started today or yesterday. So the African community, the Black Austrian community, so let's say decades before, were, let's say, started criticizing the way the museum was organized, also more like, let's say, a prison for objects coming from their village. So you can go there at the Naturhistorisches Museum, for example, and or Kunsthistorisches Museum, and realize that there are objects coming from the region from where you are. So, and the other fact that the museum as such were really completely, let's say, separated from the realities so Austrian or Black African are experiencing in Austria. So I want here to give an example of a museum in Cameroon, really close to the people, to their problem, the Blackitude Museum. So directed by Christian Tuisse. I met Mr. Christian Tuisse, and he showed me how the museum is functioning, the Blackitude Museum. It's not only a place where objects are protected, but the museum have a humanitarian, let's say, project to help, let's say, refugees, and at different scale. So you really see how they are close to the people, really close. And so this is a picture of a museum functioning differently than the Naturhistorisches or the Kunsthistorisches Museum, for example. So sometimes when you visit Kunsthistorisches Museum, so the way they are really handling you as visitor, so you have the impression you are really let me say it, you are sort of criminal, or they are fearing that you just come there to get to something, an object, and run away. So that is the constellation there in Vienna. And there I will just say the museum as a Western European institution needs something Achille Mbembe called let's say the word is justice and reconciliation, let's say meeting or justice and reconciliation organization. So the museum have to reconcile with the people, have to question itself. But that is even the problem now when we are speaking of the restitution issue. The museum in Vienna are raising questions that are, when from our perspective, a sort of distraction. So they are speaking there of provenience fortune. So asking themselves, we have first to find where those objects are coming. But the problem is when you are asking the question of provenience, it is also the question about the belongings. Who is the owner of those objects? And that means that question, behind that question, there is also the question of the nation state. Nation state defined, let's say, from the Western perspective, the nation state as a creation of the West. So when we go back before the European, let's say, came in Africa, there were not those boundaries. So an object was something belonging, for example, I take a concrete example, the Fang. The Fang, they are a folk living in the southern part of Cameroon and also in the northern part of Gabon. So, before the European came, there were no boundaries between Gabon and Cameroon. So, a Fang mask, for example, they were put somewhere, let's say, where people just were circulating, and one person can just stay there before the mass and utter a prayer and then go. So you could not say it belonged to the Fang from Cameroon or it doesn't belong to the Fang of of Gabon. And now the question of provenience. So who is the real owner of the mask now? So that are let's say question ambiguities, let's say caused or that occurred when those questions are raised. So the question of restitution is really a complex one, and even the word restitution, it sounds like people just want to wash their hands. So when we give them back, and then the problem is solved. So I will not monopolize the word. Simon wants to say also to tell something.
Yes, concerning your question, I think there is a wonderful paragraph inside the introduction. Reparations are juridically understood as compensations for historical crimes and inequities, having the aim of remedying injustices and supporting specific groups of people and populations to re-prosper. That is the first sentence. When I come back to Germany, when I come back to Austria, to Europe, I say to myself, the first thing they should do, there should be a kind of national ceremony of purification. Because the racism we face every day, discrimination we face every day, those are also part of those reparations and part of the restitution. As soon as they came and took all those beautiful artifacts with violence, violence is continuing today, not only on objects, but on human beings. And I think this is the most important thing for Europe, to ask for this kind of Versöhnung with Africans, with all those who are victims in their own society. It will start here. They cannot say that we will bring it to Africa and it is finished. This society should start respecting life. As Daniel said before with the case in the US, it is important to focus on human dignity. If we cannot respect human dignity in this country, in this continent, how can we respect human dignity elsewhere? And I think restitution will start there. And the second point for me is that the African Union is an African institution, and currently Mr. Tshisekedi, the president, has in its own agenda the question of restitution. I think this should be also part of the process, even if the institution is so weak. I've been working the last 4 years on the topic of Africans in concentration camps in Austria. There were Africans in concentration camps, but the African Union was not even able to support such project, even to send a speech. And when I sit down and see with whom I work on the topic of Africans under Nazi dictatorship, and we are not even able to respect that one, I think we have some troubles. We are in troubles as soon as we cannot respect human dignities. And for us, for me, I think restitution, of course, Africa is concerned, but as soon as I'm not respected in this country, it is not an easy affair. And I will ask Europe to respect my dignity. And if there are police violence against Africans or against other human beings, it should be really condemned. Not like we don't know, but it should be condemned. Yeah? And my restitution, our way of speaking about restitution, about reconciliation, start with the respect of human dignity on the European soil. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel and Simon, for these very strong words. I think it's a big challenge. It's calling on really beyond anything that you can write and create. So I would like to wrap up that very important presentation that you gave to us and much to think with by saying that we will find some repercussions in what you said in the further course of today. For instance, I think of Avni Sethi, an Indian scholar who today would do a performance which he not usually does, but she wants to revive a shrine of a Sufi that has been destroyed in the midst of these political, very racist entanglements in India. And it was a shrine that everyone could visit on the street, as you mentioned, that it was accessible for everyone because it was about life and not about who it belongs to in any political sense. We will also have Nyakasuru Rumboro, one activist from Tanzania who came here actually already in the 1970s and will remind us what it took, to raise these legal questions. And last not least, we will have Mwazulu Diabanza, an activist who throughout borders is raising all these questions on dignity. We will also have Nora Chipomiri, who will, with the performance, ignite what it means to recognize life. Thank you so much for all this.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.